Alright, so for those of you who've been watching the continuing saga of chopping the deck up, you'll remember that we had a straight cut, pardon me, it's kind of windy, but we had a straight cut here, and we found that this part was sounding a little dull when I was whacking it, so you can see I cut more. And that really is kind of the rule of thumb. When in doubt, cut more. And I cut this part out because I'm actually going to replace this hatch. And it's not going to be a hatch anymore. So I'm going to drop in fresh core and then glass over the top of it and the hatch will disappear. So I cut this back, and we can't video the cutting because glass is flying everywhere and it's not good for our camera girl. But I just finished cutting less than 5 minutes ago. So you can see that this was around the whole hatch. There's another piece somewhere, trust me, here it is. And I cut this off so that I can remove this bit of core here. I'm going to drop in a piece of plywood that's the same thickness as the core and then glass over the whole thing, and it will restore the structure of the boat and make this hatch just flat disappear. Which is good because it was bad, and whoever put this hatch in, this is what let the water in, plus some little thing here, that caused all this problem. And then over here, you can see from this line right here that I cut and checked the edge, but it was still a little loose. Here you can see it's well attached. You can see that some of the glass broke. So that's because this is well attached, so it's not wet. But this was wet, so we're going to let it dry for a day. And you know, I'm not sure with the sun, but here you can see where there's sun and there's moisture here. So you can sort of see the moisture. And so we're going to let that moisture evaporate, and it will change to this color when it's dry. And when it's dry, we'll just pour some epoxy on this, put that piece down, set a brick on it. It'll cure and the deck will be strong and life will be good. And then the foredeck of our boat will be okay. So that's all I wanted you to see in this little chapter is, if you didn't cut enough, cut more. It's not that big of a deal. And that's actually kind of the biggest thing that I wanted out of this tiny little chapter is, it's actually not that big of a deal. Go ahead, cut more. Cut more. So that's the gig. So that's we're coming to the end of our short little chapter in our long, boring video on redoing core. But I just wanted you to be able to see that if you run into more, cut more. Alright, so welcome back to the next little part. It's actually the next day for me, but it's a fraction of a second for you. So it got a little dark and cold last night, so our video person wasn't able to cover it. But you can see I cut out around the hatch that used to be here, and I left the bottom fiberglass, but I cut the top fiberglass and removed the core, even though this area of core was good, because I'm going to lay a piece of plywood over the top of this as new core. So there's a few things that you need to know. You need to measure how thick your core is so that you know how thick you need your new core to be. So this is nothing but core, so it's very easy to measure here. But you can measure anywhere you want. So you want to measure how thick your core is so you know what to replace. And especially here in this section, this whole section, I'm going to replace the core with marine grade or exterior grade plywood. And it will add a little extra structure. It's a lot easier to work with, and it's only a little bit of extra weight. It's also really cheap. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can cut it into the little squares like the core used to be. I'm actually going to cut it to shape. So where this hatch used to be, I'm going to cut a single piece, lay it in here, epoxy it down, and then glass over the top of it. And you'll get to see all of that, but I'm letting you know what we're doing. In this section, it has to be really clean. You lightly sand it just so your epoxy will bond, and we'll show you all of it. But now we are measuring all of these things so that we can cut the plywood to be as close to an exact fit as you can. And you can be off by an amazing amount and you won't die. But the best thing is to have your plywood be a perfect fit. So you try to make these cutout lines as straight as you can, and then you cut your plywood. We're going to be cutting our plywood over there, but I will probably cut it ever so slightly oversized, and then either remove a little bit more core to make it fit, or trim the piece of plywood down to make it fit. And so you get a long yapping thing to explain what we're doing, but that's our next step, and I wanted it to be covered because it's actually a pretty important step. So in the last parts, we cut our deck open, cleared out the bad core, and we just kept removing bad core until we got to the end of the wet, nasty, broken down stuff. And now we are preparing to measure so that we can cut plywood, replace the core. So I'll show you the part about gluing down, but I wanted to explain it so that you knew what we're doing. And I'm not going to show you the long, boring, tedious thing. I get a piece of paper, I draw a picture of what I'm going to cut out, I do all my measurements, measure twice, cut once, and then I go cut this will be 3 pieces of plywood. I'll go cut my plywood, and then beautiful Vidi behind the camera, hey beautiful Vidi, will hopefully be available to video fitting the plywood in and even gluing it down today. And then tomorrow we'll glue the deck back on, and the next day we'll grind out and I'll show you how to glass it all back together. But anyway, that's what's happening for now, so carry on. Alright, so I'm in my next chapter. It's the end of the same day for you, fraction of a second again. But I wanted to show you that we cut the plywood out, and there's a couple little things to know. The boat, there are no flat surfaces on a boat. It's got what's called camber, where it curves this way. Some boats curve this way. Boats have curves everywhere. There's no such thing as a straight line on a boat. But plywood is nothing but straight lines. So we've cut out our pieces so that they fit. We've scraped the piss out of the bottom underneath them so that they are sitting against something that's as flat as it can be, but it is not flat. So you'll have little corners that stick up. Like on this piece, these 2 corners are up. Everything else is pretty good, but these 2 corners are up. To get those corners to go down is not a realistic expectation. So we're going to use our thickened epoxy, and in the next little bit I'll show you how thick I like it. Different people like it different, but I'll show you how thick I like it, and I've done many of these, so I have a little bit of, my opinion should have a little bit of weight. But so the epoxy underneath will fill any little tiny voids, and it will fill it perfectly. And then you come back later with a grinding disc, and I'll show you the kind that I like, and really quickly it'll just take this off, make it flat, and life will be good. And then we're going to have fiberglass over the top of it, so no one will ever see it. A couple other little pointers. I always mark the top of the piece of wood because none of these things are perfectly straight, so I just mark my top. And me personally, I always put my arrow forward. So then I know any project that I'm doing, if I see an arrow, it's pointing forward. You can use any system you want. I've just been doing this for, you don't even want to know how many decades I've been doing this. And the whole damn time, I've been putting my arrows forward. So whatever system you use, go ahead and use your own, or you can do arrows forward too. But you should have something, because in the heat of battle, when there's epoxy all over the place and things are dripping and you're stressed and it's one, or this works or it doesn't and blah blah blah, it's nice to know top, forward. And so you have these nice stable datums for top and forward. And most of our things are pretty tight. Like this doesn't move, none of them move. But there's little tiny voids. I don't know if you can see from the angle you're at. The camera's not going to move, but there's little pieces where a chunk of old core got torn out in the process of trimming things, and there's a little void over here, and you try to have it as perfect as you can, but do not be worried if it's not absolutely perfect. The more perfect, the better. If you have the time and you really want absolute perfection, you can measure hundreds of measurements, you can trim for hours and hours and hours, and you will have absolute perfection. And it can be achieved. And there are people that really need that in their soul. They can't have any imperfections. But the truth is, for somebody who's trying to get these things done, you can have little imperfections, no one will die. You want to make them as small as possible. I mentioned in the last part of the video, so I'm not actually contradicting myself, even though I might seem like it. You want to make those imperfections as small as possible. If they get too big, if you start getting over 1/8 of an inch, over 1/4 of an inch, you might want to look at trimming a little piece to slide in there. Cutting better, trimming better. But you don't have to have a heart attack. That's the main thing you need to understand in this chapter here, is you don't have to have a heart attack over this stuff. It's all going to be covered. It's all going to be full of epoxy. So you don't want to do a bad job, because it's your boat. Or if it's your customer, it's your customer. All right. Good afternoon, fellow boaters. So we're out here on the foredeck. It's breezy today. It's a new day for me. It's probably the same day for you, unless these videos are so damn boring that you have to break it up into pieces. But so it's a new day. We have let everything dry. Our plywood is cut. Nothing has been touched or moved since we ran out of card space in the last video, and it unsurreptitiously and unceremoniously ended. Over. But anyway, so we are back out on the foredeck. Everything is dry. Nothing has changed. And we are about to start epoxying our plywood down. So I wanted you to see what we're doing. Go over a couple of quick things. I use West System epoxy. I use West System epoxy because I've been using West System epoxy since before most of the current human race was born. And I'm just used to it. It has its pluses, it has its minuses. I've used System 3 and I like it. I've used private label epoxies and I like most of them. I use a West System just because I have a commercial account. I get it unbelievably cheaply, and I'm used to it. So there you go. The reason I take a moment on epoxies here is because within reason, it doesn't matter which one you use. There are some, like System 3, that do not have what's called the blush. Blush is a chemical thing that when you use West System or any epoxy like West System, it will have a waxy surface that comes to the top, and you have to sand it and wash it with acetone or something like that to get it off. Otherwise the next layer won't stick well. So it's a problem for West System. And as I recall, System 3 and several others like that do not have the blush, so it's easier. You still should sand between dried layers, cured layers, but it's not quite as urgent. With West System, it's a life or death. So this is our little sidebar into epoxies. You can use any epoxy you want, whatever epoxy you can get, whatever within reason, whatever epoxy is the cheapest. They're not all the same, but functionally they're all the same. And if you have any questions about epoxies, there's people that are a lot smarter about it than me, but I'm perfectly willing to talk to you. So if you want to send a message or something like that, feel free. But you can wander down to West Marine or there's dedicated epoxy places. I have a place that I go to, and wonderful Jenny takes care of us there. And I'm trying to remember, Fiber Lay, I think is the name of her company, and or the company that she works for. She's in St. Petersburg, Florida. It is. It's Fiber Lay. They don't pay me anything. Fiber Lay. Jenny is wonderful. She's just a good person. One of those rare people that's just a damn good person. I'm proud to know her. And she'll just tell you the truth. She will not push you in any particular direction, so after she's told you the truth, you have to make up your own damn mind. But she's a good girl. So anyway, that's our sidebar on epoxy, which was longer than I had planned on, but it's important to a lot of people, so I took some time on it. I'm using West System, as I mentioned, 80 times just because I'm used to it and I get it really cheap. And so that's that. I got a bunch of buckets, and we're going to go through buckets because we're going to mix. We're going to lay wet epoxy, then we're going to thicken the epoxy and put ooze down and set the plywood or the new core into ooze. Whether you use plywood or any other core, the process is actually the same. And there's a few steps that are different, but the epoxying it down step is the same. And I have my brushes. I get them at Harbor Freight. I really should get them at West Marine, and I will probably start doing that because I have a great commercial account. But if you don't have a commercial account, it's kind of hard to beat Harbor Freight when they're on sale. They're practically free. I'm using colloidal silica as my thickener, and it's been a while since I've been at a boatyard that I worked at. When I was working at boatyards, the paint companies give us stir sticks by the hundreds for free, and so the boatyard gives them to me for free. But I haven't actually worked as an employee in a boatyard in a while now. And so I don't have a bunch of free stir sticks, and so I'm using the stir chopsticks. And so it's really important to understand how desperately crucial it is to have the exact right kind of stir stick, because it actually doesn't matter at all. The only thing you need to make sure is that your stir stick does not contaminate what you're working with. And I found chopsticks, and so we're using the highly technical stir chopsticks. And so that's the gig. So we have our brushes, we have our epoxy, we have wind. So I have to hold on to my colloidal silica or it goes airborne because it weighs nothing. And we're going to start up on buckets. I have my beautiful Whitey behind the camera. I'm set. So we're going to start by, you can see I got it in there pretty good, removing our pieces of core, setting them aside. And cleaning. So I'm not going to make you watch me cleaning, but really I'm going to use one of these brushes as a disposable cleaning brush. I'm going to go in the direction of the wind, which seems to be changing, but anyway, going to go in the direction of the wind, brush all this stuff out, and then Videy will bring you back in a fraction of one of your seconds, probably only be a few of my minutes, and see you in a fraction of a second. Alright, so we're back, and so I'm not going to go into epoxy again. Whatever epoxy you're using, mix some up. I use West System. And I don't talk while I'm pumping because then I forget. And because it's going to be a little cool tonight, even though you're not supposed to, a tiny little jolt extra. But don't tell anybody, because you're not supposed to do that. And so now, I'm using my highly technical stir chopsticks. All epoxies need to be stirred well, so don't cheat on that. And then we're just laying epoxy in there. And you can be ceremonious about it. I stopped being ceremonious decades ago. I found out that the prettiness was not actually relevant. Because, don't mean to be disrespectful and have bad English, but ain't nobody gonna see it. The only thing that's actually important is to make sure that you actually cover it all. And now, the one thing that I did not bring out, that I need to bring out, are my cool blue gloves. So you get a brief vacation while I run and grab blue gloves. Back in a second. All right, welcome back. Now, if you've seen many of my videos, you'll know that I don't take bad care of myself. I actually try to take good care of myself. I'm married to an amazing woman. I have a wonderful dog, and my mother loves me. I have reasons to live, and there's lots of fun stuff out there to eat, and cool places to visit. But I'm not freaky about self-protection stuff. There are some people that just go completely nuts about it, and they're welcome to do that. And I would never say that they were wrong. I'm just not one of them. So there. So the reason that we need blue gloves is that you have to seal every surface, and you have to be very dedicated. This actually is a very important step. Whether you use marine grade plywood or exterior grade plywood, which some people say is basically the same, or any other kind of plywood, or any other kind of core, when you're doing a repair, and a repair is different than a first-time build. A first-time build, you are hopefully in a very clean environment. Life is good. And life is good. But out here in the world of repairs, life, at least for core, is not good. And so we need to make sure that it is completely sealed. And you don't have to go insane, but you have to be a little crazy about it. And on these end grain pieces, I like to hit it twice because it soaks some up, and then it's available for more. And more is good. Because if you get any water intrusion again, and you did not seal it up, thou shalt have problems. Alright, so now I'm going to cheat. Set this over here. That worked basically well. I'm going to, one of the nice things about West System is that I can add to it. Not forever, but I can add to it. That little squirt off the side that I cheated on again. And now this is another opinion thing, and I have big boxes of this stuff as well. But I like to reuse this container because there's not too much of it here, and especially on a windy day. It likes to run away! It is not a fiberglass product at all. Girls eat this stuff to make their fingernails stronger. I don't recommend it. Breathing it, by the way, is bad. You don't want to breathe it. It's bad for your lungs. But eating it apparently is okay. So we're making this into a paste. We have already, it's called wetting out. So we have already wetted our surface. And now we are going to create the actual adhesive. So you just stir. Try not to do it on a, you can see in there, I'm just going to try to keep my stuff from blowing away. So it's best if you don't do it on a windy day, but if it's a windy day, it's a windy day. So here we have a paste. And the highly technical terms that are used to describe these pastes are mayonnaise and peanut butter. No kidding. Those are actually the industry terms for this stuff. So you can see, you can mix it a little thicker if you want. You can mix it a little thinner, but not a whole lot thinner. But that is the thickness that we're going to on our highly technical stir chopstick. Too much is better than not enough. If you have not enough, you will have a void. The void will lead to possible failures that you don't need. And so why have failures if you don't have to? And now you get to reuse your tools. You want it to go up the edges. Not too crazy, but it's going to fill your voids. All across the bottom. Now a couple little pointers. Epoxy by itself has a pot life or a kick time. And that pot life is determined by your temperature and your mix. I'm using a fast kicker, and so I have less time. But the reason that I bring it up here is that when you add anything to it, any thickener, it extends your pot life or your kick time. It gives you more time to work with it. You don't want to waste that time, but don't be too freaky if you don't move quite as fast as I'm moving after 30 years of doing this. If you're doing it your first time, because you have some time. Unless you're on a really hot day and life is really intense. Oh, that's what you want. When you see the ooze, oh yeah, baby. All right, so we're good. Life is good. So you can't see it probably with the camera, but I watched this ooze come up, and then as I let go, I watched it go down, but it's not pulling any in, so there's no void. But since we have cool gloves on, this is one of your cheater tricks. When it pulls stuff in, oh yeah! So anytime you have a spot that it's looking like it's pulling down and you don't have enough goop, you actually do. And don't worry too much about much of anything actually. Just make sure you got enough ooze in there that it's really stuck down. We're gonna come back and grind this thing to make sure that it is flush with the other core. Because we're going to glue the old pieces of deck back on, we don't want it to be proud. We don't want it to stick up. And as I mentioned earlier in the videos, it's going to be proud. It's going to stick up. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Because the deck is cambered this way, bent this way. And this one is pretty straight this way, but it's actually not. It's got a little bit of a curve, reverse camber. So it is impossible to make a flat piece of plywood go onto a not flat, it's called a substrate or lower piece. And you can do, if you're a cabinet maker, oh, good for you. Make the bottom of it perfect. But for the rest of us, we cheat. And we epoxy it down, make sure there's no voids, everything is golden, and then we come back with a grinding tool that I'm going to show you in a future piece of this video, and it will take absolutely no time at all. It is so unbelievably easy to make this thing go to the shape that we want it to be, that for me personally it's not worth hassling with trying to make it perfect on the bottom side. But different people approach these things differently, so I want you to have the options. If you're a cabinet maker, by all means be a cabinet maker. If you're a shipwright and you can do that kind of stuff, by all means you should do it. I don't have that level of skill and dedication all in the same mixing cup, so I do it this way. It's worked great for a lot of years. The first boat that I did was a Columbia 50. I did it over 25 years ago, and it's still unbelievable. It's going great. There's no problems. So I have a bit of a track record, but there's always somebody who disagrees no matter what you say. There's always somebody who disagrees, and there's room for that. So that's it. This is glued down. I'm going to turn you loose and go back to gluing the rest of it down. Enjoy your boat.